I'd like to call your attention tonight to the 11th chapter of Hebrews and verse 6. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. I'd like to call your attention tonight to the 11th chapter of Hebrews and verse 6. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. It says, "But without faith it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him." Do you believe tonight that God is? And that he is a rewarder of those that diligently seek him? You know, we don't like to think about rewards, but actually I think they're very important. Because if the Lord told you to do certain things, as far as your health is concerned, and you did those things and you were not healthy, what actually would be the point, right? But God says that the things that he tells us to do, that he rewards those faithful efforts by giving us health, by giving us the things that we need. I can remember when I first became a Seventh-day Adventist, I thought that I made some tremendous sacrifices. I can remember when I quit smoking. I thought that the Lord was so pleased with that I was probably just about ready to be translated. I thought it was a tremendous sacrifice. And now I realize that all I sacrificed was, emphysema and lung cancer. And I look back at, all the so-called sacrifices that I have made, and they look pretty ridiculous now to me. Not sacrifices at all. And the Lord has rewarded me with a good degree of health. I feel better now than I did when I was a lot younger. And it seems like I feel just about the same every year. I don't feel that my health is falling down. It was good news to hear about Bob, wasn't it? Amen. Just praising the Lord. Lots of prayers have went out. And we talked about these things, Bob and I did. The fact that we're saved by hope, and the Lord really doesn't want us to give up hope. And we need that hope to keep us going. And as we do put the things into practice that he's told us to put into practice, we should be able to look forward to something good, don't you think? That's all part of it. Well, I wanted to start out tonight talking a little bit about our immune system, just to show you some of the wonderful things that the Lord has incorporated in this wonderful human body that we have. The immune system basically is made up of the lymphatic system and certain blood cells, white cells to be precise. And they're needful because out there, we can't see them, of course, but there's all those little itsy-bitsy microorganisms that are constantly trying to invade us, invade our beings, and make us sick. However, the Lord has marvelously created the human body in such a way that he has ways of fighting those things off. We basically have 3 lines of defense that protect us from the invasion and onslaught of disease. The first line of defense is sort of a non-specific line of defense. Mechanical and chemical type barriers. Can you think of a very large mechanical barrier that you have on your person that keeps out microorganisms? Okay? Covers our whole body, doesn't it? It's impervious to water. Keeps us healthy by keeping things out that are bad and keeping things in that are good. We also have other mechanical type things that work for us. What happens when something gets up your nose that shouldn't be there? You sneeze. That's a mechanical barrier. You sneeze and a tremendous wind is created and just sends that thing flying. What happens when an irritant, you breathe in an irritant, what happens? Okay, you cough and your mucous membranes might start producing mucus and your nose will run, and these are mechanisms of the body that help to rid itself of foreign agents, things that shouldn't ought to be there. And so we're told, the servant of the Lord has told us many times, that we need to learn how to reason from what to what? Cause to effect. When our nose is running, it may not be the best idea to go and stop it from running, because it may be running for a good reason. It may be washing out some irritants that shouldn't be there. And if we happen to have a cough, it may not be the best idea to use something to suppress that cough, because it may be trying to rid us of something that shouldn't be there. But we're so used to treating symptoms that that many people don't take the time to reason from cause to effect and reason just why is it I am sneezing, and just why is it my nose is running, and just why is it that I have a cough, and what might I do to assist the body in its attempt to rid itself of this foreign particle. That's the type of reasoning we need to get into. We also have a second line of defense, and it's called phagocytosis. Isn't that a wonderful word? Phagocytosis. As I said the other night, most of these medical words, I mean, they are, strange and hard to pronounce and big and long and all that. But when you really break them down and find out what their meaning is, they usually mean something very basic and very simple. And this word simply means, phagon means to eat, and cyto means cell. And so a phagocyte is a cell eater. And they are put in the body for a good reason. They are housekeepers. They are soldiers. And when they come across something foreign, something that doesn't have an identification card, is not part of you, then they treat it as an enemy and they take care of it. They actually ingest it and destroy it chemically. And it's quite a marvel to watch this type of thing under a microscope. They actually just sort of, their body just sort of engulfs, it just surrounds the foreign particle and takes it right in. If you were to watch a neutrophil under a microscope, he might look something like a bloodhound, sniffing at a scent, just sort of sniffing all over, trying to find this fellow. And as soon as he picks up the scent, kind of a chemical scent, I guess we'll say, he stops all of his wandering around and he heads right for that foreign particle. And when he gets to it, he engulfs it, he takes it in, he ingests it chemically, and he destroys it. So it's a wonderful work that they do. We have a couple different types. We have the microphages, which are basically the neutrophils, and then we have macrophages, which are bigger. Some wander about the body, cleaning it up, and others are fixed in certain places, sort of stationary, so they can catch things as they pass by. Another line of defense, secondary line of defense, is called inflammation. Now, when you think of inflammation, you don't really think of that as something good, do you? It doesn't sound good at all. That kind of hurts. That's kind of uncomfortable. But inflammation is actually a line of defense for the body. Let's say that you were out working in the garden and you cut your finger and you got a little bit of foreign matter in there. Well, the cells that were injured, they put out a chemical substance, different ones, but one of which is called histamine. And that chemical substance causes the blood vessels in the area to dilate. Now what happens when blood vessels dilate? Pardon? Okay, more blood. The circulation to that area is increased. And with the greater circulation, you get redness. And with the greater circulation, you get heat. And as fluids accumulate, yes, you get swelling. And as you get swelling, you get pain. That's right. That's the 4 signs of inflammation, right? And we're all very familiar with those in a very practical, personal way. Well, as those blood vessels dilate and the blood comes rushing to that area, an interesting thing happens. The body sends white blood cells to the area to fight, bacteria or whatever the foreign agent might be. And I like to picture them sort of arriving in big troop transports, trucks and ships and whatnot. And an interesting phenomena takes place when they arrive at the scene. The walls of that blood vessel actually sort of stretch. They coarsen, and the walls become altered as if you took a dishcloth and held it up to the light and stretched it. You could see more light through it as you stretch it because you're altering the fabric. Well, these blood vessels actually stretch and coarsen, and little microscopic holes appear in the blood vessel itself, so that these white blood cells can actually just sort of climb right through the holes, and they can attack the enemy right on sight. And I just kind of like to picture in my mind a great big battle that ensues where they're fighting these invaders. Another interesting thing happens is fluid from the blood plasma actually seeps through the walls and actually starts clotting around that general area, and the area is clotted off or walled off so that the enemy cannot, just be running rampant anywhere it wants to. It has to stay basically in that area. And so then the war, takes place, and fluid accumulates, and the swelling takes place, and pain occurs, and you get this sort of white fluid that appears. We call that pus, and that's the dead, dying, and wounded, I guess you could say, from this battle. And then when the battle is over, the lymphatic system, which is sort of like just picture an open-ended hose, sitting in a pond. It's sort of like that. And it siphons off that fluid from that area and siphons it up through the lymphatic vessels until it gets to these little places we call what? Lymph nodes. And when you got a good infection, those lymph nodes get kind of sore and swollen, don't they? And they have to sort of crank up their generators, and they start producing phagocytes so that they can start, taking care of that debris. They're like filtering units. So they filter that fluid and take out all the germs and bacteria and whatever else might be there. They clean the fluid before they return it back to the bloodstream. So that's a line of defense. That's something good. And there are things that we're going to talk about here in just a little bit that we can do to assist the body when it's dealing with an inflammation or an infection. Now the third line of defense, sort of the final line of defense, can be defined as the power of an individual to resist or overcome the effects of a particular disease or other harmful agent. It's called immunity, and it's our final line of defense. Now this line of defense basically is taken up by 3 different individuals: the macrophages, whom we've already mentioned, and the T and B lymphocytes. They are the heroes when it comes to fighting this particular war. And they all share one common objective, and that is to identify and destroy all substances, living or inert, that are not part of you, that are foreign to your body, that do not have an identification card. You remember it says in early writings how the angels of the Lord had these little gold cards that they presented at the gate so they could come to and fro. Well, I believe that in our body there's sort of identification cards that our cells have that identifies them as part of you. And anyone that doesn't have that card is considered an outsider, is considered an enemy, potentially dangerous, and they are taken care of. There are 4 critical phases to what we call an immune response. The first phase is the recognition of the enemy. The next stage is the amplification of forces. The third stage is the attack. And the fourth stage is the slowdown or the retreat. You know, when the war is called off, it's won. We don't want to keep fighting once a battle is over. So it's the slowdown process. And I'd just sort of like to take you through one of these little wars, but before I do, I want to introduce to you the actors. You know, every play has actors, and every story also usually has to have a villain, right? And in this particular story, this war in the cells, or cell wars, the villain we'll call tonight is Mr. Virus. And the virus is nothing much more than a bundle of genetic material that is not quite life. In order for him to actually reproduce himself, he has to commandeer one of our cells. He doesn't have his own manufacturing plant, you see. He's kind of a devious little critter, and he infiltrates our body, and he sneaks inside our healthy cells, and he commandeers all the machinery that the cell has to not do what it was meant to do, but to reproduce himself. And so that's what he does. He duplicates himself until there gets so many of him that the cell actually bursts and frees them all. And then you know what they do? They go infiltrate other cells, and they reproduce themselves in those cells until those cells burst, and you see you've got this amplification of the enemy's army. Well, now we'll talk about the good guys. The first is the macrophage. He's the soldier in the trenches, I guess you could say. He's the first line of defense, and it's his job to tie into these fellows when he sees one, and to alert the commander-in-chief of the immune system, which is the helper T cell. And the helper T cell, once he gets involved in this, he does call all the shots. He tells everybody what to do. Doesn't speak, but he gives them chemical messages that tells them what they're supposed to do. His next of kin is the killer T cell. Now, he's definitely an infantryman, and it's his job to seek out and destroy cells that have been invaded by the virus. He just actually pokes holes in them, and their contact spills out so that the rest of our immune system can work on them and take care of them. And then we have the B cell, or the B lymphocyte, and he, I guess you could say, is like a biological arms factory. His job is to produce or manufacture bombs. He's an explosive expert. And the bombs that he produces are called antibodies, little Y-shaped proteins that are very essential in this particular war that I'm going to tell you about in a few minutes. The next one in our line of defense is called the suppressor T cell. He's the one that calls the war off when it's time to call it off. And last but not least, we have the memory cells. Most of the cells in this battle are going to die within a very short amount of time, but there are cells that will live on and on. Before the enemy actually attacked us, we may have not have had too many cells in the body that could recognize this particular fellow. But after the war has been fought, we have an army that can recognize this fellow. So if he ever comes knocking on our door again, he better look out, because he's got some trouble on his hands. Well, let's sort of proceed through one of these wars so we can see just something how it works. Let's say that you were sitting on that airplane or train or whatever it might be, and you may not have got enough sleep the night before or something. Your resistance is down just a little bit. And the fellow next to you has got a very, very virulent cold and strong viruses. And he gives you one of these, chew, you know, and he forgot to cover his mouth with his handkerchief, you know, to keep those all to himself. And, you know, they became airborne. You know, you just picture them parachuting down all over the place, thousands of them. And you have to breathe, right? And so, you know, you breathe them into your, in through your nose. And also, you're eating at the time, and, you know, thousands of them are covering your plate. You can't see them. It'd be horrible if you could. I'm glad we can't, but they're there just the same. And so you have them with your lunch. And so they get inside and they start invading cells, and it's not long, and you feel yourself coming down with this cold. Well, what's going on inside your body? Well, here comes a macrophage, a frontline defender, and he sees one of these fellows. He checks him for his identification, doesn't have any, so, you know, he takes him on, and a battle takes place. He takes his flag, so to speak, part of his substance, which we call an antigen. An antigen is simply any substance that will initiate an immune response within our body. And antigens are of all shapes. As a matter of fact, out there in nature, there are hundreds of millions of antigens, all with different shapes. And so he takes this antigen and he sort of wears it like a flag, I guess you could say, and its shape is sticking out there. And along comes a helper T cell. Now, it just so happens that this helper T cell is of a special kind, because he was trained. He was brought into the world for such a time as this. And his particular shape mirrors the shape of this antigen precisely, like a lock and a key. He is the opposite counterpart, I guess you could say. And the lymphocytes, the T lymphocytes actually got their training in the thymus gland. That's what they're called, a T lymphocyte. And not all of them can identify all hundreds of millions of antigens. No, a certain group is able to identify just one. And another group can identify just one. And another group, they can identify just one. But when you take their whole scouting party as a whole, you know, as a whole, they can identify all 100 million of them. As a matter of fact, they can even identify the ones that have been produced in the laboratory artificially that didn't before exist. They were even trained to do that. Now you ask me how that is possible with the Lord not being involved in it. So they can identify them all. And so here comes the helper T cell. He sees it, he locks onto it, and then the macrophage secretes a chemical substance which, number one, sends a message to the brain to start producing a what, do you think? A fever. A fever. And it's interesting. We'll talk about this maybe tonight, but for sure tomorrow night. We'll talk about Van't Hoff's principle. There's a man by the name of Van't Hoff that discovered that as body tissues get warmer, all the chemical reactions that take place inside the body are sped up. And white blood cells, for example, become far more active when the heat gets turned on as they are prior to the heat being turned on. They are not only more active and more energetic, but they can gobble up more of the foreign substances, you know, viruses, germs, bacteria, whatever it might be. So they're more active, they're more aggressive, and they can do a better work when the heat gets turned up. And the opposite of that, when the temperature goes down, everything slows down. Heat, speed up. Cold, slow down. So the body turns on the heat, and everything gets active and really gets moving. The next thing it does, the chemical message that it sends, is to the helper T cell to take over the battle. And then he becomes the commander-in-chief of the immune system, and he starts calling all the shots chemically. he sends a chemical message out that tells other T cells to start producing an army. You know, just got to amplify our forces now. We've got to prepare for this tremendous battle that is taking place. And so they start multiplying and multiplying and multiplying until they become an army. He sends out a similar message to the B lymphocytes so that they can produce an army. He sends out another message to the B lymphocytes, tells them to start producing antibodies. And as the B lymphocytes really get going and their factories are in full steam, they produce thousands of antibodies a second, you know, to put out into the body. And so now the battle is really going on. And the killer T cells are going out there and they're poking holes in infected cells, and the contents is spilling out, and the macrophages are globbing onto those guys. And these little Y-shaped proteins, the bombs that the B cells manufactured, these little white cell proteins actually glob onto these antigens, and they can slow them down in their progress so that macrophages can come and take care of them, or they will collect substances from the blood called complement. And when it reaches a certain sequence, the antibody actually sort of blows up like a bomb and blows a hole in the side of the cell. And isn't that interesting? I mean, we're talking war here, going on at a microscopic level. So, you know, they blow holes in things. And so we've got this big war going on, and every time, you know, these chemical messages cascade down, the forces are magnified even more and more and more and more until the enemy is finally overcome by sheer force of arms. They're outnumbered, outflanked, outgunned, out everything, and the war is finally lost by them. Then the mop-up crews come in and clean up, and then certain cells have a special training now so that they stay on guard, they stay on watch in case that enemy ever approaches our system again, because if it does, we won't even get a sniffle this time, because now we are immune to that particular thing, whatever it might be. Of course, nature has so many different antigens to throw at us. You know, you never quite get them all written down in your little book. But the thing of it is, every time our body overcomes something, it's actually the stronger for it. It becomes better able to resist. And you probably heard it's not really new, but it's coming out as sort of new. And that is that there are many things, illnesses right now, that there are no antibiotics known to mankind that can even touch. And people wonder, why is that? Well, it's because of the antibiotics themselves. They are what has brought this situation on. What has happened is, in the 50s, we thought that when we found the antibiotics, that we had, you know, won the war, that there was no disease that we couldn't whip. But what happened because of the overuse and abuse of antibiotics, I know when I was a little boy, like I would get a cold, which is a viral infection, and I would go to a doctor. They would always give you one of those big walloping doses of penicillin in your backside, and your hip was so sore for several days you couldn't even sit down. Well, that was not for the viral infection which you now had. That was for the bacterial infection that you might get as a secondary infection. And we know that antibiotics have no value whatsoever in fighting a viral infection, only a bacterial infection. So there was a lot of abuse of those types of things. They were even used almost as a preventative measure to keep a person healthy. They thought there was no harm in it. But now they have found that those little characters that were able to escape the antibiotic and mutate and whatnot actually became stronger and resistant and developed new strains of viruses, strains that we are not able to even cope with at this day and age. However, the Lord has given us things that we can use that assist the body in this fight and that work extremely well. We used to have treatments for polio, for example, that worked very well. As we mentioned last night, we had treatments for malaria. As we said the other night, that in the big influenza epidemics, when people were dying by the thousands, they never lost as much as one case in the Battle Creek Sanitarium by using these other methods of treatment. Which brings us now to these other methods of treatment. I'd like to read you one statement here. This is found in Ministry of Healing. It says, "In health and in sickness, pure water is one of heaven's choicest blessings. Its proper use promotes health. It is the beverage which God provided to quench the thirst of animals and man. Drunk freely, it helps to supply the necessities of the system and assists nature to resist disease. The external application of water is one of the easiest and most satisfactory ways of regulating the circulation of blood. A cold or cool bath is an excellent tonic. Warm baths open the pores and thus aid in the elimination of impurities. Both warm and neutral baths soothe the nerves and equalize the circulation. But many have never learned by experience the beneficial effects of the proper use of water. They are afraid of it. Water treatments are not appreciated as they should be, and to apply them skillfully requires work that many are unwilling to perform. But none should feel excused for ignorance or indifference on this subject. There are many ways in which water can be applied to relieve pain and check disease. All should become intelligent in its use in simple home treatments. Mothers especially should know how to care for their families in both health and sickness." But it takes work, you see. It takes towels and cloths and pots and pans and blankets and sheets, and water's kind of messy, and oh, I don't know if I want to go through all this, you see, kind of a thing. They've never been proven ineffective. They've only been discarded because, like in our sanitariums, they felt that they just took up too much room. I have these big hydrotherapy departments, and after all, we can run a whole lot more people through here if we use other methods rather than these type of methods. It's interesting, though, that at the turn of the century, the kings and queens of Europe flocked to the Battle Creek Sanitarium. And today we have very few of those places left, very, very few. But over in Europe, they're all over the place. These hygienic places that use water treatments and diet and exercise and all these things. And where did they get it? They got it from the Battle Creek Sanitarium. And they took it back to Europe, and they spread it throughout the land. But it originated actually over here. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about water tonight. And I guess if we're going to think about using water, we ought to know a little bit about it. I mean, we all know it's wet and clear, and we drink it, and we wash with it, and we do lots of things with it, but we never really think too much more about it than that. But water is a very interesting substance. It's an amazing thing. There really isn't anything else even close to being like it. It's very, very unique. And the most wonderful thing about it is, for most of us anyway, it's free. Now there's something. That's probably why it's not in use a lot, because it's free. You can't make money out of something that's free, and it's available to just about everybody. Now there are certain properties about water that really make water work. We call them physical properties. There's basically 4 physical properties of water. The first physical property has to do with water's ability to absorb and also its ability to communicate heat. It does this better than any other substance known to mankind. Just isn't anything like it. To give you just an example, heat is basically measured in calories. And I'm just going to give you a couple definitions. I'm sure you won't remember all of this, but I'll give you some definitions. The first one is that a calorie is the amount of heat that it takes to raise 1 gram of water 1 degree centigrade. That's a calorie. And this water is used as a standard for the measurement of a calorie. And everything else then is compared to it. So everything has a different, what's called a specific heat. Now, specific heat is the amount of heat it takes to raise 1 gram of any substance 1 degree centigrade. And like I said, it's compared to water. So water then has a specific heat of, what would that be? One calorie. That's right, 1. And let's compare it to something else. Let's compare it to alcohol, to ethyl alcohol. It has a specific heat of 0.59. Okay, 0.59. That's just like 59% of a calorie. So it's almost half of what water is. So when alcohol and water are at the same temperature, water has a lot more calories of heat to it, but at the same temperature. To give you a more practical example of that, let's say we had 2 patients here, and we had alcohol in one container, and we had water in another container, and we got them sopping wet, and we put them on the heads of our patient. Okay, both of these are at 0 degrees centigrade. Now let's say that both our patients eliminated heat at about the same amount of time. Which is going to arrive at 25 degrees centigrade faster? The water or the alcohol? That's right, the alcohol. Because it's going to take 25 calories to raise each gram of water to 25 degrees centigrade, but it's only going to take 15 calories per gram of the alcohol to raise it to 25 degrees centigrade. So it's going to heat up a lot faster than the water. So we could say then that water has a much greater heat absorbing and heat communicating properties than does the alcohol. And we could, compare that to many other substances, and you would see that water is the best. Some give off their heat too fast, and others too slow. They do this at different rates, but nothing does it like water. The second physical property that water has that's quite interesting is its the impression, the thermic impression that it leaves on your body. Because you see, water, even though it's at the same temperature as other things are, water just feels colder when it's cold and hotter when it's hot. It just has that ability. To give you an example of that, let's say that you walked into a bathroom and you disrobed, and you're standing there. The temperature in the room is 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, how do you feel? Is that pretty good? Maybe a little on the cool side, but not much. 75 degrees, that's not bad, is it? Now, you can handle that pretty well. You don't really feel that uncomfortable. Okay, now I want you to step over to this bathtub. We have a bathtub filled with water, and the water is also at 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, can you tell the difference? Yes, you could tell the difference. That's because the impression that water is going to leave on your physiology via your nervous system is 27 times greater than that of air. 27 times greater than that of air at the same temperature. So it has that ability. You know, the Lord has put these marvelous nerve receptors all over our body, but just looking at the skin, for example, you realize in our hands alone here that we have nerve endings that are able to detect heat, and we have other nerve endings different from those that are able to detect cold. And then we have other nerve endings that are able to detect pressure, and other ones that are able to detect touch. And then we have others, of course, that are able to detect pain. So we got 5 different receptors in the skin that can detect all these different things. I mean, I can pick up this book and I can feel that it's kind of got a bumpy texture. I can feel that with my fingers. And at the same time that I'm feeling that with my fingers, I can tell the difference of the pressure that this book is putting on my hands right now and the pressure now that I'm rubbing my fingers across it with the weight of my other hand. I can feel the difference in pressure. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that marvelous? You know, when like I said the other night, when you study physiology, I mean, the more you study, the deeper you go, the more you are awed by the way that the Lord put us together. It's so marvelous. It's just beyond comprehension sometimes to, as you get down and you say, well, oh, it's a good thing the Lord did that, because that couldn't happen had the Lord not done that. And that kind of scenario is played over and over and over again. You know, oh, look at that. It works this way, and oh, the Lord already thought of it. You know, I mean, here he already had this mechanism because this works this way, and this had to work this way, and there it is. And over and over and over, you see those wonderful things. So water not only has the ability to absorb and communicate a lot of heat, but it also has the ability to leave quite a profound impression upon your physiology when it is either cooler than your skin or when it is warmer than your skin. You could tell the difference in a marked manner. Another physical property that is quite interesting about water is water's ability to be used with other mechanical stimuli. For example, we have this terry cloth towel, and terry cloth kind of has a rough surface, right? And so we can put this in some ice water and wring it out a bit, and we can bring it over to your skin here. We can give you a cold mitten friction rub, and not only will you get the effects of the temperature change from your skin, but you also get the effects of the friction of rubbing. So you got 2 things going for you there. And water, I mean, it's marvelous. It's just, you can't even hardly tell it's there except it's wet, but it doesn't change the color, or you know, you can wash it again and it's clean. It's not oily or greasy or any other thing like that. It's so wonderful in that respect that you can take a shower head and you can have the holes in the shower head so fine that they're just like little teeny needle points. And you can turn on the pressure and water will come out as a sort of a needle spray. Now they have showers, like 16-headed showers that you can walk into. I don't know if you ever have taken one of these, but you walk. I hear somebody shaking their head back there, Forrest. And you stand in there and they turn these on, and they turn them on nice and hot, and so you feel the heat, and your physiology is stimulated because of the heat that is hitting your body. But you're also stimulated because these things are hitting you like little needles, you see. So you're getting stimulated in both ways. And then before you get too comfortable with that, they turn it on cold, you see, and now you've got a different contrast, and you know, all this information is being taken up here in your cerebral cortex, and it's trying to kind of compute this and wonder what this remarkable change is. You know, whether you're to say ow or ah or just what you're supposed to do with all that information. And your circulation is increased. You know, your blood is circulating through your body. Your skin turns red, and a few contrasts back and forth with that, and you walk out of that shower just like one of these light bulbs. You know, you're just lit up and electrified, and you feel like there's just about not anything on earth that you wouldn't be able to do if you put your mind to it. It's kind of one of those kind of treatments. We call that a tonic treatment, which is different from a depressive type treatment. It's a good way to treat somebody that's depressed. You know, you can't be depressed once you walk out of one of those after you're so feeling so good. Well, try to do that with crankcase oil or you know, Vaseline or something. You know, I mean, that'd be pretty hard to put out through a shower head. But water, because it's made just the way it is, you know, it has no problem accomplishing that little task for us. Another interesting thing about water, or a fourth property, is water as a solvent. It mixes well with most everything. I mean, you can take a little bit of shampoo, and you can take some water, and you can get your hair clean. You know, you can take a little bit of soap on a terry cloth towel, and you can wash all the dead cells off your body. You know, those things you can't see, but, you know, our body's constantly having dead cells come up on itself. You know, we just do that. That's natural. And the body's constantly putting metabolic waste products, you know, out on the skin. And we can just use a little bit of soap and a terry cloth, washcloth, and together with the water, we can just get squeaky clean and really feel nice and refreshed. And not only is it good to get all that contaminants off you, and is that healthy, but the stimulation of being in the shower and rubbing the cloth on your body and all that, that's also very, very good for you. So it's a wonderful thing. We drink it because almost all the chemical reactions that take place inside our body are done inside a medium of water. You know, when we inhale air, you know, that air is finally, or oxygen is finally diffused across the membrane of our cell through a water medium. And, you know, the carbon dioxide is actually comes back across the same way in an opposite direction, you know, through a medium of water. And our cells are just sort of sitting out there, you know, bathing in water. And food is conveyed to the cells by water, and waste products are taken away from the cells by water. And so water is a very, very important thing inside of us and outside of us. So we should get it on the outside, and we should get plenty of it on the inside. You know, there's another interesting thing about water that just strikes me as being something of interest, kind of off the subject of hydrotherapy, but it's the fact that, you know, most things, at least to a point, I mean, there is a temperature that we call absolute zero, where nothing moves any longer. But as you heat things up, what happens to molecules? Do they get closer together or further apart? They get further apart. And when you cool things down, what do? They get closer together. And most things work that way. Heat up, further apart, cool down, closer together. Well, water is very similar. You heat it up, the molecules get further apart. You cool it down, they get closer together, or they condense, until it reaches a certain temperature. And when it reaches 39 degrees Fahrenheit, they start getting looser again. Now, you ever think about why that might be? Because if they continue to become dense like other materials do, then when you got ice and water, what would it do? It would sink to the bottom. And all the oceans would fill up with ice, and all the lakes would fill up with ice, and the rivers and streams and everything would be ice. And because the sun isn't you know, that great at heating things up here on Earth, you just have shallow bodies of water that would be available during certain times of the year. And of course all the fish would die, and all the wildlife, or the sea life would die, and we would die too if this took place. But the Lord says, well, I'm going to do a little something different with water, and I'm going to make another law here that we're going to say water, it's going to expand, but when it gets to a certain temperature here, it's only going to constrict so much, and then we're going to do this so that the ice will float, and we'll just do it that way. Isn't that wonderful? That the Lord, He just thought of everything, didn't He? I mean, the more I study the sciences, the more I look at physiology, I just see that the Lord thought of everything. He just, to the minutest, itsy bitsy, teeny weeny little detail, and you know, it just staggers my mind sometimes to to think about it. You know, just an example of that. I just got to give an example of that. You know, the ear. You know, how often do we think about our ears? I mean, as long as our ears aren't hurting or we can hear out of them pretty good, we don't think too much about our ears, do we? But when you look at an ear very, very carefully and you go inside and you look at the way everything is made and actually what's going on, it's absolutely fantastic. For example, I'm talking away here and I only got 10 minutes left. I got to hurry so I can do some of this. Sound, it travels and it hits our ears, and we have this little thing inside our ear called the what? The eardrum, the tympanic membrane, and that sets up a vibration, just a little vibration. And there's 3 little bones inside the middle ear, and those little bones being connected one to another, they start vibrating and they pass on this vibration one to the other until they hit this little thing called the oval window, which is the beginning of our very inner ear. And that vibration is transmitted to a bony structure. And then inside that bony structure, we have what they call the semicircular canals. We have these little tubes that are full of fluid, and that vibration is transmitted to those little tubes. And then there's actually a tube within the tube that has fluid in it, and it's transmitted to that little tube. And then that vibration is still carried further to a little nerve that is stimulated. And then that nerve takes that message up to the cerebral cortex, and we hear the symphony. Isn't that wonderful? I mean, think about it. How is it that we hear a symphony? I mean, I can't even, all I can see is here's this little nerve. I mean, I've seen them before. I've seen pictures of them. And these little teeny fibers on the end of it are just wiggling back and forth. And that little wiggle, that little shake, that little vibration is taking up to the cerebral cortex of our brain, and that is interpreted as a symphony or a voice or the warbling of a bird or whatever it might be. Just, that's fantastic, I think. How the Lord is so wonderful. Well, now, in the next couple of minutes, don't have too many left, I want to talk a little bit about some practical applications here. Tomorrow we'll get into just a little bit of more theory, because I think, if we're going to use water, we need to understand something about it. And if we're going to use it on people in a practical way, we should have a little bit of an idea of what's happening to their physiology as we're doing this. Even if we don't understand it all, and even if we can't remember it all later, at least we say, well, I heard it and it made sense, and so I know it works. I know there's a scientific reason even why it does what it does. Here I have 2 bowls. I'm going to put hot water in this one at about 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm going to put ice water in this one. And I'm going to give a treatment that's called a contrasting hot and cold treatment. Now, these are just small pans, but we can duplicate this in many, many different ways. Hot and cold, and use it for lots of different things. Let's say that I had an infection in my hand. And we've already explained inflammation and infection a little bit, and we see what the body's trying to do. So I'm going to try to assist the body. The body's trying to increase the circulation. It's trying to get white blood cells to the area. It wants the lymphatic system to start draining off the debris. So what do? Well, I stick my hand in hot water. By sticking it in hot water, have I increased the circulation? Wasn't that what the body was trying to do? And so I'm assisting the body in what it's already attempting to do for itself. I'm going to dilate those blood vessels. I'm going to increase the circulation. I'm going to bring white blood cells to the area. I'm going to facilitate the removal of waste. I'm going to facilitate the bringing of nutrients and oxygen to that area. I'm going to really assist the body in a marked manner. And then I'm going to switch it over here after 3 minutes. I'm going to switch it over here to this icy cold water. And then guess what's going to happen? Yeah, my hand's not going to be quite sure what it's supposed to do. And initially it's going to clamp down, but because it's so hot and because it's just such a small part of me, now it's going to try to fight back. And it's going to try to open up those blood vessels. And then it's going to close them down and it's going to start pumping, you see. And now I'm really getting surges of blood in that area. I'm going to do that for about 30 seconds. Then I'm going to go back over here to this hot and warm it up again real good, get the circulation flowing, and then I'm going to stick it back in here again, and then it's going to go over the same ground. And I'm going to do that about 3 changes, always beginning with hot and always ending with cold. Now I can take that simple treatment and I can transfer that to a foot, or I can transfer that to a sitz bath, a hot and cold sitz bath, or I can transmit that to a sinus infection. Have you ever had a sinus infection? Well, that's a terrible thing. But I can put one bulky towel into this one and one bulky towel into this one, and I can take it out here. I don't even want to wring it out. I just want to lift it up. It's all dripping all over the place, and I just want to wrap that very carefully as I can stand the heat around my sinus area, about hairline, and then wrap it around my face and bring it over my cheeks and hold it until it loses its heat. And I'm going to drop it back in there, and then I'm going to bring it up and do it again. And drop it in there and bring it back up and do it again. And then, before my face gets all used to that, I'm going to kind of, get it wondering what's happening by coming over to this icy cold water. And now I'm going to just give my face a nice rinse with this icy cold water. And before it gets too used to that, I'm going to go back over here to this hot again. And I'm going to do this 3 more times. Come back over here for 30 seconds and do this. Come back over here for 3 minutes and do this. And come back over here and finish up with my cold. 3 minutes hot, 30 seconds cold. Back and forth, back and forth. And guess what? My sinuses, the body was trying to send blood up there and increase the circulation and do this thing. But guess what happened when it did? It gave me a headache, and it just made me even feel worse. But this is going to really get things moving, and it's going to break up that congestion and start moving things through. And if I want to really help the situation out, I'm going to stand down here in a hot foot bath while I'm doing this treatment, because a hot foot bath is also a decongestant. Anytime you want to decongest your head, or you want to decongest your chest, or you want to decongest the pelvic area, you give yourself a hot foot bath. And the blood vessels in the feet are then dilated, and it's called a hydrostatic type maneuver here, where the pipes just got bigger in your feet. And so in order to fill those bigger pipes, the blood had to go down there to fill it. And guess where it left? It left your head to fill the pipes in the feet. Also, and we'll talk about this more tomorrow night, you've got this homeostatic reactive type reaction that takes place, where that also, the body doesn't want the feet to get too hot, so it sends blood down there to try to take away the heat. So that's another mechanism that's working for you. And you will decongest your head that way. And that's why, like when you give yourself a hot foot bath for the relief of a headache, your feet are in hot water, which is pulling the blood away from the head, and then you put a cold ice pack on the head, and what does cold do to the blood vessels? Constricts. And so you've got this driving it out, and you've got your feet in hot water, that's sort of pulling it out. And that blood that was engorged in your head and congestion in your head and was pressing against the delicate nerve endings that were making your head go boom, 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 those blood vessels are now brought down to normal size. The pressure is relieved, the headache goes away. After about 20 or 30 minutes of that type of treatment, it usually doesn't come back. And so that's better than reaching for an aspirin or some kind of decongestant or something like that, which doesn't really do anything but treat a symptom. But this actually treats the problem. And now my time is, he's giving me a flat line here, so I guess we'll take that as the end. And tomorrow night we'll spend a little more time on practical things, and I got some experiences also I want to share with you. you.